I am a big fan of giant monster movies. From the original King Kong all the way to Godzilla Minus One, I can't think of a single movie featuring a giant monster that I didn't enjoy in one way or another. They've ranged from goofy fun like some of the old Showa-era films, to serious movies with powerful messages like Godzilla Minus One. But as much as I adore the dramatic tension of serious monster movies, having something goofy every once in a while to cleanse the palate isn't all that bad, such as the latest entry in Legendary's Monsterverse, Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. The second entry to be directed by Adam Wingard, the movie follows Kong as he discovers an ancient secret society of apes hidden deep within the Hollow Earth. However, alongside his discovery come powerful new threats that he can only take down by teaming up with Godzilla. What follows is a very fun romp through the Monsterverse, with plenty of action and excitement for fans of the franchise. While the human characters were pretty one-note, except for Tracker and Bernie, I love these two, the monsters stole the show in the best way possible. But what's crazy about the movie isn't just how much fans of the franchise loved it. The movie also kind of saved the Monsterverse from ending with this newest entry. See, the Monsterverse had a really strong start prior to it becoming a shared universe. Godzilla 2014 ended up getting strong reviews from critics and audiences alike, who praised the story for being a slow-burn reintroduction to Godzilla for a larger American audience. While there was some criticism thrown its way for always cutting away from big fights before they happened, the film overall has a unique vibe to it that not much in the Monsterverse afterwards has really had. It's because of these positive reviews, this different presentation, and Godzilla being front and center that the movie ended up being a financial success. It ended its theatrical run with $529.1 million grossed against a $160 million budget. And before we go any further, a general rule when it comes to knowing if a movie is successful or not is to find its break-even point. This is usually double the film's listed budget to account for how much money is spent on advertisements, as well as how much of a cut theaters get from ticket sales. So, with that in mind, Godzilla 2014 would have a $320 million break-even point, meaning it grossed $200 million in profits. That's no small number, especially for a movie that was, at the time, a bit of a risky move. There had been no new Godzilla movie from Toho in 10 years up to this point, so for an American studio to make one was both exciting and kind of terrifying. But it worked out, and the Monsterverse wound up expanding into even more movies. But as the movies went on, something started to change. It was small at first, but over time it grew more noticeable with every new film. The second installment, Kong Skull Island, got positive reviews once again. This time, with a whopping $185 million budget, the movie made around the same as Godzilla, coming in at $568.6 million. Once again, the studio probably made around $200 million in profits from the film, indicating they had a successful lineup of movies on their hands. And with critical reception calling Skull Island an exciting edge-of-your-seat ride, it's no surprise that it ended up being such a big hit. Personally, I think it's one of my favorite King Kong movies of all time because it veers from the typical formula of Kong falling in love with Ann Darrow and falling off the Empire State Building. But I digress. The film ended with a really cool post-credit surprise by tying it into the previous Godzilla film, and I really loved where everything was going, and so were audiences, and, it seemed, critics as well. But that's when the divide happened, and I'm not talking financially here, but rather the reception of the movies when it came to professional film critics versus general audiences. Godzilla King of the Monsters remains my all-time favorite movie in the Monsterverse, but many don't see it that way. The movie ended up being a critical flop, with many professional film critics not happy with the human story stringing the movie together. However, audiences still enjoyed the film, those who went to go see it in theaters anyway. You see, there was a pretty big change in the movie's box office performance compared to both Godzilla 2014 and Kong Skull Island. Boasting a budget of somewhere between $170 and $200 million, Godzilla King of the Monsters only made $387.3 million at the global box office, meaning the film made a mere $47 million at best and lost $13 million at worst. At best, it really wasn't the biggest hit, and could be considered a box office flop. But even if it did make back the money spent on production and ads, it was pennies in comparison to how well the other two movies did. However, this wasn't the biggest problem in the world for the Monsterverse. You see, even though King of the Monsters didn't do well, at worst, the franchise as a whole had grossed a collective $385 million in estimated profits. Even if one movie had failed, relatively speaking, it didn't make the entire franchise a dud. Instead, it showed that there was a vested interest in the franchise, but that budgeting had to be done in order to make sure the next movie would be able to happen, even if this movie was going to be the last in the Monsterverse. Yes, believe it or not, based on the original plans for the franchise, Godzilla vs. Kong was supposed to be a possible final entry in the Monsterverse. So, this was it. The Hail Mary shot across the bow, ready to bring this Titan-filled franchise to a triumphant end. And then, The whole world shut down. The COVID-19 pandemic was a massive disaster for the movie industry. Films that had cost tens of millions, sometimes even over $100 million to make, were no longer able to play in movie theaters. Instead, streaming became king for a time, as everyone realized they could just sit at home and watch new originals on different services for the price of one movie ticket a month per service. Give or take a few dollars anyway. One of these streaming services was HBO Max, Warner Bros. Streamer for all of the movies and TV series owned by the company. Warner Bros., who had a partnership with Legendary in distributing the Monsterverse. And so, as the pandemic continued to sweep across the world, it was decided that Godzilla vs. Kong would be released simultaneously in theaters and on HBO Max on March 31st, 2021. And the movie became a massive hit. Now, first off, the box office performance for this would-be conclusive entry to the Monsterverse was not great compared to the first two installments. On an estimated budget between $155 and $200 million, Godzilla vs. Kong grossed $470.1 million in theaters. That means it made a profit of somewhere between $70 and $160 million, which is a pretty wide margin now that I'm writing it down in this script. But regardless, the film was profitable in theaters, even if it didn't fully match up to the earnings of the first two movies. But where the film really stood out was on HBO Max. The movie became the highest streamed film on the platform ever, holding the spot for 1 month before Mortal Kombat took its place in April. But even so, the fact it was so quick to rise to the top showed promise that the franchise could continue. And continue it did, with a Godzilla vs. Kong sequel announced not long after the movie's rapid success. And now we're here. Godzilla x Kong has run its course in theaters and should be on streaming platforms by the time this video gets released. While it's unclear how well it will do on Max in the coming days and weeks, its box office performance is a telling sign of how well the film is going to fare on streaming. Off an estimated budget of $130 to $150 million, Godzilla x Kong earned $570 million in the global box office. This is, of course, as of writing on July 2nd, 2024, meaning that number could go up in countries where the film is still playing. And, crunching the numbers, this means the movie made an estimated $270 to $310 million in profits, the most of any Monsterverse movie by a long shot. But now, in the midst of all these numbers and the positive direction the franchise is heading in, you're probably wondering, how does this prove that Godzilla x Kong saved the Monsterverse? And the answer is simple. Legendary played the long game. Godzilla vs. Kong's performance on HBO Max was indicative that there were people who, given the opportunity outside a global pandemic, would have gone to see the film in theaters. So, Legendary took a risk, deciding to continue the franchise with another movie, this time harkening back to the Showa era of kaiju films. Despite its critical reception being about as low as King of the Monsters, though, it ended up delivering on what people wanted to see from the franchise. Familiar monsters duking it out with some new faces thrown in the mix. Godzilla x Kong proved that the hype surrounding the Monsterverse on HBO Max was not just a fluke, nor was the success of Godzilla vs. Kong in theaters attributed to no other movies coming out during the pandemic. This franchise has what it takes to stand on its own 2 feet, even in a climate of slow recovery for movies in theaters. The fact Godzilla x Kong was able to make such a massive profit, even as the movie industry continues to struggle at the box office, shows that people really just want entertaining movies with fun, familiar elements in them. That's all it takes to get people seats in theaters, and Godzilla x Kong excelled at doing just that. And yes, it definitely saved the Monsterverse, influencing its continued expansion moving forward thanks to its financial success. Another film in the franchise has been announced for March 26, 2027, with David Callahan of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse writing, and Grant Sputore, I might be mispronouncing that, director of I Am Mother, well, directing. Despite this different team, it's clear Legendary knows now that these movies can be successful if done right, and as long as they're able to keep the budget down to a reasonable size. It helps, of course, that Godzilla and Kong are the titular characters, their history and popularity no doubt making the last 2 movies as successful as they are. And while it's unclear how much the movie impacted plans for the franchise on the TV side of things, Monarch: Legacy of Monsters Season 2 was announced not long after Godzilla x Kong's initial success, followed by other Apple TV Plus spin-offs that are expected to arrive in the coming years. So, aside from being an exciting entry in the ever-expanding monster franchise, Godzilla x Kong saved the Monsterverse thanks to its theatrical performance. By being the highest-grossing movie in the franchise, it guaranteed that more movies like it are going to be made. And, while I hope Toho continues to make their own Godzilla movies like -1, which is probably one of my favorites after seeing it last month, the Monsterverse could be a fun balance to those more polished stories. With the newest installment being such a success, it paints a really bright picture for the future of the movie franchise. And I think, given how entertaining it was, a similar feel and tone are likely to appear in future entries. I, for one, am looking forward to seeing how all of this plays out and what it means for Godzilla and Kong's future adventures together. This has been Zeno, and I'll see you again in the space between spaces.